too. It didn't change. This almost worked. Let's try that. Okay. Take three.
Hello, friends and neighbors. Welcome back to the studio class of Low Brass U. You hand us your low brass questions. We'll tell you what to do. My name is Connor, and here with us today on the modern day tuba is our fearless leader, Zach Marley.
Progress, to say the least. But thank you all for tuning in today. I'm going to try to get myself centered. I have it where I can recenter you, but I cannot recenter myself. Although you are quite low. There we go.
Low. Sorry, I was coloring.
Yeah, we've got some arts and crafts as a part of today's stream, so that's something to look forward to. But hello, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well today. Just as a reminder, if you want to drop your low brass and music questions in the chat, we'll do our best to answer them. But we thought that today we would start with a little kind of discussion on Ride of the Valkyries. So, Ride of Valkyries, as a lot of us know, it's the reason why I chose this excerpt today is because it's for all low brass. Yes, there are different concerns. I think we'll probably start doing some excerpts that are specific to each instrument, but the ones that are great for everybody are really helpful. So Ride of the Valkyries is one of them. And we'll kind of specifically be looking at the major section. Realistically, it's a very long opera, so there's lots of major sections. But talking about the major section of the main excerpt, which is where the tuba plays. The tuba doesn't play on the minor version, but it plays on the major version.
I guess that makes sense, doesn't it?
You can't have the tuba on everything. It's like you don't, when you're texting someone, do you have exclamation points on every sentence?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah. Some do.
do.
And some composers write like that, where you have exclamation on every single statement of everything. And the minor version is important. There's a lot going on, but it's not the major. The major one's the big deal, right?
Right. Yes, that's the cool one.
I mean, they're both cool.
They're both cool.
They're both cool.
But everyone gets to jump in the pool for the major one,
right?
Particularly at this section that we're talking about.
Right. So I've got some graphics to throw on the screen here.
Ooh.
So, maybe it would have been helpful to have all the parts up there, but we'll kind of just throw this up there for now, which is just the tuba part. So more or less, I mean, we'd have to go into each individual part to look at where it's octaves, where it's two octaves from this part. So Connor, a little trivia for you. Do you know how many trombone parts there are?
Are there 3?
No.
See,
there's a contrabass part.
Slipping. Is there really?
Yeah, which that's realistically what most of the bass parts are.
Oh.
Yeah. So, yeah. So for the most part, that's really what we're, that's the bass part, and then everybody plays the first part for any trombone audition.
Right. That's the one you always see.
So, just looking through this excerpt, you can see that it's a lot of louds, right? We got a fortissimo there, another fortissimo, another fortissimo, another fortissimo. Nothing else, but all loud. So I think the first thing that I would caution everybody is that we don't need to have the loudest possible version of Ride of the Valkyries every single time we play it. So I know you play this in auditions. How loud do you play it when you play it in auditions?
As full as I can still manage to play it clearly and beautifully is usually the test that I go for. I would say I probably err on the softer side. Like I'm probably more conservative about like fear of barking and blatting.
Mm-hmm.
Where I think that usually the feedback that I get is I could give it a little more gas, but that's often the case. Like what we're worried about is like you don't want this to sound like frantic.
Right. Right. We definitely, I think that that's a good way to put it. You said as, loud but still full and beautiful. So if we're going by that metric, is that the loudest possible thing that you can play?
Absolutely not. We're probably clocking in at like 75%.
Right. And there are a lot of other factors with all of that kind of make some, decisions and or help us make our decision of how loud we should play there. But I think that's a really good kind of metric is we still need it to sound good. I think, I talk about this a lot more with tuba than I do trombone, but I think it's probably still a relevant thing to talk about is that playing low brass in an orchestra is a dirty job. And no one really wants to see what you're doing back there. So I think it has to be loud, but there definitely is a too loud in an audition. There's definitely a too loud in the orchestra too. Let's get that out of the way. But maybe the threshold for what is too loud in each situation is slightly different.
Right, you can get away with a lot more, like dynamics crimes when you're in the back and it's like in flight, and it's like in all reality, like you're gonna want to give that some juice for like the drama of the moment and clarity over the orchestra.
Right.
But if you played like you were trying to cut over some gigantic ensemble and you were the only low brass player in an audition setting, the reality of what's coming out of your horn might not be what they want to hear.
Right.
Even though there might be times where that's appropriate. You probably still get the hand if you're really playing like ugly loud.
Right. I think also when you're playing in a larger ensemble, you're part of a team. So if somebody airballs a note, obviously we want to play every note, but sometimes you're playing really loud, it doesn't go perfectly. But if there are 5 of you back there,
yep, like someone's gonna get each pitch. You'll be fine.
Plus bass trumpet too. There are enough teammates back there.
Yes.
So it's not all on the responsibility of one person, although we do theoretically want to play all the notes in every situation. Right. But I think that that's something to definitely think about with this excerpt is how loud, and also in practice, how loud does it need to be when you practice? Does it need to be loud every time you practice it?
Right. You should probably have a repertoire of dynamics that you are capable of playing this excerpt at a level that you are satisfied with.
Right. I think that
first musicality and accuracy.
I think that's a really big part of it is getting your best product. I think in practice, too many of us, and I'm sure I include myself, and I, not to speak for you, but I assume that you're guilty of these sorts of things, is we play it the way it goes every single time.
Mm-hmm.
Yes. And, I was in tuba studio class today and I was writing comments for a bunch of my students. And one of the things that always came up on this one specific excerpt, we were doing band excerpts, and this from Liszt's Les Preludes, which is, originally for orchestra, but the tuba excerpt from the band orchestration is the one that we kind of deal with a lot. And there are all these staccato arpeggios that go down to like the lowest E flat on the piano. Like they go down really, really low. And yes, they should be separated as staccato translates to. But should they be super, super, short, and should they have no tone on them?
Right. Like, probably not.
Probably not. So that's definitely one thing that I think about a lot is, what are we trying to get out of this, and how are we trying to practice it? So I think that's something that's really helpful to kind of think about. If I pull this back on the screen, I guess we don't even have to go all the way back. But looking at this, there's one glaring rhythm that I know you've spent time on. I know I've spent time on, What's the rhythm here that a lot of us are kind of concerned about?
Oh, it's the dotted eighth, 16th situation.
Right. So that dotted 8/16 is uber important. It's always important. It will always be important. We always have to make sure that we're taking care of business with that, and it also is there. It's not just rhythm; it's also clarity of that rhythm and clarity of those that 16th in there that sometimes is a little bit difficult to get, particularly on tuba, but on all low brass instruments for sure.
Hmm.
So, how do you practice that rhythm, Connor? I'm curious. Do you
Well,
do
I mean,
anything specific?
in the times that I always am, regularly shedding my right of the Valkyrie like a
Mm-hmm.
good trombonist should. I mean, the first thing that I like to do if I can hear myself in recordings of myself having trouble with it is first off slowing it down and then hearing the subdivision of like the 16th notes that live inside of the dotted eighth and the 16th notes that live inside of the eighth note on either side of the 16th note. If I can hear that in my head, then I'll have a better shot of more accurately doing it. I had a teacher one time in undergrad that tried to. I failed. I just so bad at this. Was trying to do the thing where you have the metronome on like one beat per bar, and trying to move it around, or trying to like have the metronome be like on the the and of one, or like different subdivision of the beat and things like that. It's another way to kind of trick your brain into hearing like a smaller time.
Right.
Of course, you probably are not doodle tonguing it, but you might.
Yeah, I'm gonna vote no on the doodle tongue. But I guess that all ideas are valid ideas, or are worth exploring maybe. But yeah, I think there are a lot of things that we can kind of do to practice all of that. One of the ways that I often have a lot of my students do, and I work on it myself, is adding a note. So I like to add another 16th note, and
Ooh,
and so I play bum 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 bum, and
ooh.
add an extra note in there, which helps me. I think that's way easier to make it where you place that low F sharp or whatever the 16th note is, whatever measure you're on, to place that more accurately.
Ooh, yeah, I like that a lot.
And I think that's kind of how I have my metronome set up for this as a practice tool. Time Guru, I don't have the ability to show Time Guru right now, but that would be helpful. So with Time Guru, which is my favorite metronome app, you use it also, right? Or no?
Oh yeah, I've got
Okay.
Time Guru.
Yeah, Time Guru is my favorite metronome app. I've tried other ones. The other ones do other things better, and it's I don't think it's received any updates like ever.
Hmm.
But that's a really cool rhythmic sort of thing to play, and have really all of those subdivisions there. One of I think the things that all of us forget about with this excerpt is the pickup.
Hmm.
So, what's a common rhythmic error that you notice on the pickup, or do you have any thoughts, Connor?
A common rhythmic error on the pickup. I mean, I imagine the inclination would be to shortchange it and to clip the pickup to make it a shorter rhythmic value than an eighth note.
That's definitely one of the things that can happen.
What else happens?
One of the things that I find that happens is not actually that it's too short, that it's too long.
Oh,
I have a lot of students
interesting.
that'll play one and two and three, bum bum ba dum bum.
Oh,
Play
wow.
a duple
So they're
subdivision.
not hearing bup 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 bup.
Right. Which I
Oh,
mean that's usually what eighth notes are, right? We're
sure.
used to them being duples. We do that more in the real world than we do, have them be in this case of being a triple, a third
Mm-hmm.
of the beat instead of half the beat. I think that's one of the first things to make sure you're thinking that subdivision da 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 bum bum ba dum bum. That's a huge thing for me, is making sure that that note is perfectly um, in this triple, or it's not in this
Mm-hmm.
complex meter sort of style. Um, what about these
Right.
accents? What do you think about these accents? Do you think anything about the accents that are on the downbeat?
Oh yeah, trying to like just put more weight on those front beats. My focus, this is the thing that gets my gizzard, is I'm trying to smack the ever living snot out of those 16th notes because I have a hard time getting them to speak with the same clarity as the long notes.
Hmm.
And that ends up becoming where I think subconsciously my accent moves over a note in that phrase.
Which
Bum, bum, bum,
there's
bum.
almost
So
some argument for a little bit of that. It's like there should that note can definitely hide.
it's kind of a
And,
physics problem. It's
right.
just like, yeah.
We have to dig that note out just at least a little bit. I think that that's something to definitely be thinking about.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but at the same time, I think there has to be an accent. And sometimes I don't even think about that being an accent, is that I back off on some of the other ones.
That's a
You know?
that's a yeah, on versions of this that I've heard a solo trombone where I really really liked it. It was like a very, not like a flat line necessarily through the two dotted quarters in the other part of it, but it's like
Hmm.
very clear that like this is exactly how big this quarter note is, and guess what? That second quarter note, same exact size, same exact shape. I really
Right.
like that.
Yeah, I think that the dotted quarters are the unsung, not heroes, but they're important.
They'll
And
get you
and everybody's only worried about the first beat.
right.
And how often, I can't tell you how many times I hear those dotted quarters being shortchanged. We
Yeah,
hear bum bum ba-dum bum bum bum. It's like
yeah. It's like some weird polyrhythm. Like, wow, that was super hit, man.
right,
Like that was not it. Or just like short, like you hear like one full length dotted chord, and then the next one's like barely an eighth note, and then they're getting two eighth notes worth of breath. I
right,
say they, I mean me,
yeah.
I.
It's okay to admit that we're not perfect.
Yes.
That's a for me. If I'm not thinking that subdivision of 3/8 notes on every dotted quarter, it's not happening. As much as I'd
Right.
love to say that I can do that without thinking, I can't do it without thinking. I have to think about it. Yeah, that's a huge part of this. One thing that I practice a lot with this, and I wonder if you have thought about this, especially, this could be extrapolated to other excerpts as well, is practicing this in different keys. Do you do that at all?
Ooh, I have not, but I think this would be a good one.
I think, there are a couple reasons why I think it's a good one, and probably why you also agree. B major, is that your favorite key to play in?
No, and there's a lot of like trombone like superstition of like harmonic series versus like what is in tune for a third of a chord, and you
Hmm.
can psych yourself out a lot between like the natural inclinations of like the partial that you're on versus like the chord tone,
Right.
and it might be helpful to play, you know, in a key center that maybe you're closer to 10,000 hours in. You know what
Right.
I mean? Like something
Maybe
a little more
maybe
home
down a
base.
half step.
Yeah.
For trombone or for B flat tuba. On C
Right.
tuba, I actually like to take it up a half step.
Mm, makes enough
Kind of
sense.
basically the same sort of thing as put it in the home key of the instrument, which in either case is only a half step away.
Right.
And I think that's something for me that really is helpful, and really kind of, at least for me, I think I hear a better version, and that's what I think is important, is that you hear yourself playing a better version, and then you realize, oh, I can do this in the key of B major also.
Right. It's like the notes are notes are notes.
Right. And then I think the other reason why this works well to put in different keys is just the fact that, you know, it's just an arpeggio, right?
Right.
It's pretty much just major arpeggios for the most part. It's one of those that's easier to kind of do in all 12 keys, or maybe not in all 12 keys, but at least a couple others. I
Right.
don't think you have to practice your excerpts in all 12 keys, but I don't think it hurts. And I think
It would take you like one afternoon of sitting around. Like once you get it in like two or three, especially if you're going in one direction, like you're just taking
Mhm.
it down a half step, down a half step, down a half step. Like by the third or fourth key, you're gonna be in a rhythm, and you might as well take the rest of the hour or whatever it is that you're doing that day, and have an enriching moment for yourself.
Right. Another great thing to practice with this one, I think, is monotone practice.
What does that mean?
Just one pitch.
Oh yeah,
Keep it
yeah.
at one pitch the entire time, and really just kind of work on that, and make it as easy as possible, as you're doing that. That's a great tool, I think, for just making this a lot easier.
That'd be
So
a nice one to do like back to back for yourself. Like maybe like just play I guess a B natural would not work for the entire thing. You have to switch like maybe a B flat or something like that halfway through, so it doesn't crunch super bad. But if you could like record yourself playing monotone
you mean A sharp?
and A sharp, blah, 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 blah.
Eh,
And then,
it's a little important, at least
all
a little
right,
bit.
all right, I understand.
Yeah, but I think, even B kind of works for most of it. And also, who's to say you have to do that with a recording? Like, I think a lot of what I'm trying to think about with that is just making sure that I'm making really clear articulations, the accent's clear, the rhythm is 100% precise, all of those sorts of things. And
Right.
so if it clashes, sometimes I don't even do something that's in the key. I primarily do. I definitely prefer to do something that's in the key. I think that that is a good starting point with this.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but sometimes I think about, well, what's your best note? What's the note that you have the clearest articulation on?
Mm-hmm.
Probably, something that's open or in first position, if I had to guess, for most people.
Right. Home base.
So, so yeah, I think that that's something to really be thinking about with this one. Um, yeah, it's such a polarizing excerpt of, like, it's one that you have to do, you can't get away from, but you can definitely practice it to death. And I think sometimes just figuring out new things to practice, like, even if they're not the thing that helps the most, sometimes just because they're different, that's
Mm-hmm.
helpful. Um, One tuba specific thing with this, I try to keep the tuba things to a minimum. And I'm assuming you knew this, but as you don't practice this on tuba, maybe it's not something you think about all the time. Is this essentially this measure of rest here?
Yeah, that's jarring.
Yeah, so if you're not a tuba player and you've only played trombone, you probably, even if you knew about it, you kind of, like, it makes sense when you hear it, but when you're in isolation, it's like, what is that doing there?
Honestly, it makes so much more sense. I mean, that part is always just kind of like confused me as a trombone player when you're just playing the same phrase twice. It's like it's clear the no doi. That's like a call and response
Hmm.
sort of thing. But
But
it's
you
funny
play all
when
the calls, or all the
right
calls and the responses.
calls and the responses. So it's an awkward thing to do as a trombone player.
So now that you're empowered with this knowledge, what do you think might happen to your average tuba player in this measure of rest? Do you think that it always goes according to plan?
No, I think one of the like least favorite things to do in playing excerpts, especially in front of people, it's not notes. It's like no amount of like tricky notes is going to get me to like I will figure out how to play the notes. It's when I have to sit there and count the rests that I really start second guessing myself. It's like if something weird's going to happen, it's going to be happening when I'm not playing.
Right. So I think that's a big thing with the tuba version, is that you have that rest there, and you have to make sure that you are, you know, dealing with that appropriately, and making sure that that's very clear, very, um, you know, 100% rhythmic. Because I always talk about, did your recording of your excerpt, does it pass the pencil test? And when I call the pencil test, I don't think I created this, but it doesn't really matter if I created it or not. But thinking about someone behind a curtain at an audition, tapping their pencil, bum bum
Right.
ba dum bum, you know, it's like, do you
Right. Are you
come
going to come
in?
back in with the pencil?
If not, thanks.
Right. And that I just like I yeah. I trust that the people that are behind the panel have impeccable time. But I know a lot of people that have impeccable time. All you have to do to figure out how like volatile that situation is, your internal sense of time, is just to go to a jam session and watch really, really good bass players and piano players get lost in a drum solo.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, or like even worse, like come in really confidently, like a beat early because they've second guessed themselves in the
Right.
expanse of that time. It's like that's fluid, man. Like even like people that I would trust, and so you got to play in such a way that is like, it's not that the time is right. That's not enough. It's that you have to be so abundantly clear about what the time is and the way that you're playing it.
Right. Yeah.
You
It's
know.
it's just so important. I think I definitely think in my teaching for, general classical lessons where we're doing excerpts and just things in general, but I guess it applies to jazz teaching as well, but especially more on the classical side, is focusing on rhythm and time and meter more than
Mm-hmm.
anything else. And I kind of feel like maybe the word misconception is a little bit strong, but I think that there is a little bit of a misconception that you win a job by having the best sound. And I know that sounds like, you know, sacrilege to say. But my thinking is that maybe you do win the job by having the best sound, but you don't get to the final round without playing with good rhythm.
Right.
Like,
Yes.
I don't think you get to the point of proving that until you're at a round or you're in a scenario where everybody's playing the right rhythms, everybody's playing all the accents, everyone's playing all the dynamics, everyone's taking care of all of those sorts of things. And then
Mhm.
to me, it's like the tiebreakers who sounds the best.
Yes, I think there's like another implication that's not usually said, that is like the the person who wins the job with the beautiful sound, like the understanding is that like all of the elements of music that make someone like, able like musically literate, those are a prerequisite, and like those, like it's implied that those are already taken care of by the time that you're getting to that beautiful sound.
Right.
But maybe sometimes we kind of get lost in the weeds, because it is like a good thing to say, like you'll sound really cool if you go to a school and you start your master class with, if you're not going to pay money to listen to that sound, then what are you doing?
Right.
It's like that's a great way to start.
At
and
the end of the day, it's
and
like,
I've done that.
right. At the end of the day, it's all important, right?
Yeah.
Is there something about playing that isn't important? No, of course it's all important, but I think that I always ask some of my, like, this is a common like first or second lesson to like my early college students, and it's like, what is more important, playing the right notes or the right rhythms? And I think especially doing that so early on, they're like a little bit afraid to get it wrong, and it's like,
Hmm.
it's not a trick question. I'm just curious what you think, and then there is a right answer that I'm looking for, although maybe it's not totally fair. But my argument is, if you play the right notes at the wrong times, they're the wrong notes.
Right.
So I mean, yes, there's some flexibility in rhythm sometimes, and nobody is ever perfect with rhythm. But I think that that's something to definitely kind of be thinking about. That you know, there's a lot that's going on, and you really have to play those rhythms accurately.
Hmm.
Especially with playing Ride or any other excerpt, rhythm to me, it's like you have to master that. And there are technical concerns with Ride of the Valkyries, especially, that make it where playing the low stuff is a little bit, it may not pop out the way that you want it to. Make it respond late. But you at least have to have, as a starting point, you have to have it up here.
Right.
There's that Arnold Jacobs quote that there's the tuba in your head and the tuba in your hands, and the tuba in your head's more important.
Ooh,
And I take
never
that
heard that.
to mean that, like, the conceptual idea is more important than the actual idea.
Hmm.
Or like what happens in the real world. It's like, obviously we want that to happen too, but if you're not
Right.
doing it here, it's like, good luck doing it with your fingers or with your slide or whatever the case may be.
Right.
Uh,
The sound that manifests is limited by the sound in the head. So it's like, if that's not together, then the best that you could ever put out is the sound in your brain. And if you got a crummy sound in your brain or crummy time in your brain, then like, well, the best thing that could possibly come out, if all aligns, is crummy time.
right. So yeah, that's definitely a huge part of all of these excerpts, and I think also one general thing, we're going to kind of start talking a little bit more about excerpts, kind of as a regular reoccurring thing. Maybe not every week, but a few every now and then.
Hmm.
One thing I'll probably try to say every single time, but I definitely want to say today at least, is excerpts aren't everything. Practice some other stuff too. I don't know who needs to hear it. I'm not sure if in our 6 viewers that are on right now, I'm not sure if one of those 6 needed to hear that, but somebody needs to hear that. It's not all about practicing excerpts. I don't think you needed to hear that, Connor, but
But I was going to say, if you're like me, then maybe you should practice them sometime. Like,
there's a
check on
balance,
them.
and I think that the other thing, this is kind of going off topic a little bit. I don't think we've talked about this on stream, but we're on episode 29, and we did more before that, so it definitely could have come up. But one of the things that I always go back to is that, like, a lot of European music study, they talk more about studying music than practicing music.
Oh yeah.
And I think that it's maybe more important to study these excerpts sometimes than it is to practice them.
Hmm.
And studying to me encompasses score study, listening, some practice as well. But maybe research on the composer. It's like, do you know anything about Wagner? Do you know
Right.
anything about this opera? Have you seen the opera? Do you know what scene this is? Do you know what's happening in the opera? I think that that's hugely important to, not that we're always painting with what notes we play exactly, but do you know what Ride of the Valkyries is? Do you know what's going on?
Right.
Do you see that scene in your head? Do you know what that's supposed to look like? So I always kind of encourage my students to do more studying than, maybe not more studying than practicing, but a lot more studying than what I think a lot of them are doing.
Right.
So
It's like there's so much to be learned by experiencing the excerpt in the context of like the larger piece of art, and then experiencing that art within like its musical and historical context, and that's going to come out in the playing of like an informed performance of that. And like you can learn all of the nuances about the excerpt by going to excerpts.com and figuring out all the tips, but like memorizing that list of tips and tricks is really really hard, and you could supplement that by just having a more global understanding of the music. And I'm realizing now, like the thing that our professor Tony Baker used to always say, which is like excerpts are like jazz tunes. Like you have to check out the records that like these tunes come from, understand their context, and like does this have a verse? What key is this normally played in? What key was it originally published in?
right,
Things like
I think
that.
that's a really good way of putting it. It's like you need to study not just one recording. I have some students who I think are listening to these pieces and are thinking about things, but they fall in love with one recording and they just listen to one recording all the time. And that also informs you of what one conductor with one orchestra, one moment in time
Mm-hmm.
did. And I think especially with tempo concerns, a lot of these excerpts don't have clear markings of tempo, and even the ones that do, I'm not always sure that that's the right approach. Sometimes that's just from some publisher, but no orchestras play at that tempo. And I think that, especially with some of the more complicated ones, or not rhythmically, but tempo wise to figure out, I think about the Dragon solo for tuba, because there's such a wide range of tempi, that conductors, that orchestras or opera orchestras go for. And I think you have to know what it is. And I always talk about it, and I definitely don't think that we've talked about this on the stream. But as do you remember in math class your box and whiskers charts? Do you remember
You
what those
just
look
like
like?
said a word that I know, but I don't know why I know it. What's Fox and Whiskers?
So box and whiskers charts, and I feel like some of our viewers will actually know this better because they probably have taken a math class more recently than either of us, and maybe learned this somewhat recently. I'm not really sure when this is kind of taught, but
I
anyway,
don't know if we're still doing Box and Whiskers. Let's hear it. I haven't.
okay, maybe box and whiskers are gone. I think box and whiskers are a good way of thinking about what your tempo should be in a piece. So
Okay.
box and whiskers, I don't have a picture to show, but it basically is separated into four sections, right? Four quartiles. You have your, as well, so first off you have your outliers on the far end. I can't use my full arms because my box is so small. So you have your outliers, little dots. We don't really include those. Past that, you have, once we get rid of just the outliers, you have the end, like the bottom of your lower quartile and your higher part of your higher quartile, and those are points, usually like dashes. And then there are lines going to the box. So those are the whiskers, and then there's the box. And the box is the middle 50%, with a line right where either the median or the average is, I can't remember, but some middle number. And thinking about with excerpts is like, for me, I want to stay inside of that box usually. I don't want to go the fastest tempo I've ever heard. I don't want to go the slowest tempo I've ever heard. I want to go somewhere in that middle trusted realm, and probably somewhere towards the exact middle, but sometimes that's not the best way to go about it.
Oh,
So we got a
very
couple
cool.
questions that rolled in. Can you explain how to do vibrato on tuba? So vibrato on all brass instruments is pretty much the same, although certain brass instruments have other ways they can do it. But kind of the traditional way that we often teach it is jaw vibrato, and I think that's in general, at least in the United States, that's what's mostly taught, and I would say that that's what I prefer hearing. So it's essentially vibrato. What it really is a manipulation of pitch, right? So we're lowering and raising the pitch around the center of that tone, and there probably are some dynamic things that are happening as well. But that's essentially what we're doing. So you can start working on it. I like having students do this where we do it kind of just as lip bends. So we do it, and we'll take a note. Let's take like your F or something, and you'll play it, but you'll bend it down. And we'll go very rhythmically, like do 6/8 and 16ths and things like that. I think that's a good kind of starting place because that's essentially what's happening, but it's got to be a little bit quicker. I always warn people, not everybody needs to be working on vibrato right now. I think that that's something to be kind of aware of. With your students, Connor, how soon do you teach vibrato? Like, do you have an age in mind, or is there another determining factor?
There's not an age in mind. Typically, I would consider it, if I was writing a lesson plan for public school, I would call it an extension. And so if the student is already mastering the concepts of the piece of literature already, time, tone, rhythm, sound, then if we have extra time, if time allows, why don't we put a little chutzpah on that long sustained note, or add some drama to the way that we're already phrasing well. So if they've already got nice big phrases that make musical sense that we're happy with, the sprinkles that we can now add can be some vibrato hither and thither. But I wouldn't say it's like, if I have a student that I have a bunch of time with, even at like 7th or 8th grade, that's ready to try it out, I'll say, sure, let's try something out. But if they're not cutting the mustard, not taking care of business, I'm not going to add that extra variable that's going to put a wrench in their sound making process.
Yeah, I think my metric is, do they make a really great sound?
Yeah.
And then I think we also have to be honest with ourselves, not just with tuba, but all brass instruments. It's like, how much do we really need vibrato? Not saying vibrato is bad. I use vibrato. I like vibrato. Some people think I like vibrato too much. But it's important to realize that, especially on tuba, it's not really for large ensemble very often. You use it occasionally. But thinking about, since we were just talking about orchestral excerpts, I can't even think of 5 orchestral excerpts for tuba that I use vibrato.
Yeah, it's not a big thing.
And in most of the ones that I could use vibrato, I would consider them to be maybe, if I feel like this is the right thing. Thinking like Beadlow being one of them from Pictures. That's one where it's a true solo. For me, it has to be a true solo. You have to be the most right, which is almost everything. So that to me is a true solo. Meistersinger is not a true solo. You're with the string basses. Mahler 1, it's around. Maybe you could argue it's a true solo. I still don't usually use vibrato on that. Or I would say I never use vibrato. But if someone wanted to argue with me on it, maybe I would say that's okay. But for me, on tuba, it's really Beadlow and maybe on Petrushka on the Bear solo. Because that is a true solo. I mean, I guess it's a duet with the E-flat clarinet. But, you're the only one playing your musical line. I tend to not use vibrato in an audition setting because I'm afraid. I'm afraid of splitting a note because we're up high and it's dicey up there. Sure. So I don't like using it up there for me. So it's almost never. In solos, I definitely use it, and you can watch videos on this channel me using vibrato on tuba and etudes as well, as I think it's necessary. But it definitely can be overdone. It's definitely not necessary. I'd worry about making a better sound more than anything. And then this is, so we'll get to these other questions, but since we're on the subject of it, my teacher wants me to use it in a solo on a held out note on low G. So my question to you is low G the lowest G on the piano, a few ledger lines down, or is this G at the bottom of the bass clef staff? Because for me on tuba, and really for any other instrument, I wouldn't play with vibrato down that low. And that has to do, for me, with thinking about how these frequencies interact. Once we get lower, the frequencies are getting slower. So trying to add vibrato on it usually just sounds unstable. Mm-hmm. And I think Oystein Bodzvik's been quoted, I haven't heard him say it, but I've heard that this is attributed to him, that he doesn't use it, I think, below E underneath the bass clef staff. So for me, if it is truly that lower one being, a few ledger lines down, I wouldn't use vibrato on that, and I would push back on using that probably. But if it was the higher one, that's about where I stop using vibrato. But I do use vibrato on that G at times.
Okay.
Any thoughts from you, Connor?
No, I think definitely like the lower you go, the trickier it can be. It's what might be mechanically like very sound vibrato technique with that low of a frequency can be misinterpreted by the ear as a wavering of pitch, and so that's just something to experiment with. And so
Yeah.
it might be a good thing if you might just like A and B this with your teacher. Like, what do you think? Do you like this one? Do you like this one? And you could come to a mutually agreed upon musical decision. But if it's just for sport and it's just trying it out in a song where the tuba is exposed, you have nothing to lose by trying out something.
Right. I missed
So see
this
what it sounds like.
from Zach saying I can only think of Beadlow and American in Paris. I did forget about American in Paris. Um, American in Paris probably is another good time to use some vibrato, but again, somewhat sparingly. You got a lot of eighth notes. You don't need it on every single eighth note. But again, that fits my criteria. And there definitely are other examples of true tuba solos in orchestra, especially when we get into more modern things. But American in Paris is one, specifically the solo, because there are other excerpts that come up from American in Paris, and I would not use it on all of those excerpts. But the main solo that's after the violin solo, that's another potentially good spot to use it. And I think that I do sometimes. That's one that I always encourage my students to try a bunch of different ways. One other thing, just since we talked about it, just to push back on your comment, Connor, they do still teach box and whiskers in middle school. So, and median is the middle line. That's what I couldn't remember. That's what I thought, but I wasn't sure. So yeah, box and whiskers for tempos, and for some of these, I legitimately have Excel spreadsheets full of tempos. Like the Dragon solo, I have Excel spreadsheets full of tempos that I pulled, or tempi that I've pulled from various orchestral recordings, and I try to kind of use that as some sort of a gauge. So Zach also says, don't know if already covered, but in many recordings, I've noticed dotted quarters in ride are accented. All the score has accents only on the first, well, I added that word, but on the first note of each measure. That's a good point. So if we're talking about Ride of the Valkyries, we're going back to that with this comment. Yeah. And yeah, I think at the end of the day, in ensemble, in these big moments, it's all accented to some extent. I think when you're listening to recordings, pretty much everything is accented. And I don't want to say that that's good or bad, but it just kind of is. And when you have a full ensemble, it's kind of hard to get that sort of thing across. One thing I would say is I don't think that how every recording plays it is exactly how we should think about playing it for an audition.
That's a good point. It's like that might have been like the musical decision of the night that was that's like jazz ESP. Like we've just kind of like locked in, and it's just like, all right, we're giving these notes the juice, and we are riding this wave, and we are making some beautiful melodies over top of this orchestra. And the first thought in my head whenever I catch a similar wave like that is not, I should back off on these two quarter notes. I'm not thinking anything. I'm just like, yeah, riding the thunder.
Right.
So, it's just like, unless you have it like really, really ingrained habitually to back off on those quarter notes, like would I resist the temptation to just kind of waylay the whole thing? No,
right.
I would not. I would play the whole thing super loud and have a great time, and it would sound awesome, and we would all high five afterwards. That being said, I'm also not a professional orchestral trombonist.
Right. I mean, and that's probably a fair thing to say. I mean, we're definitely people who've studied all of these things, but no one knows everything. And at the end of the day, especially when we're talking about orchestral excerpts, I think it's always important to bring up is you could play it one way for one audition committee, and they could say, thank you, please never come back. And then another one, you could play it the exact same way, and they could say, you're hired. How much do you want? That's probably not exactly the case that it's that polarized, but especially with Ride and these other loud excerpts, one of the things that I often think about is, you hear about people taking auditions and people saying that's not loud enough, and you need to play that louder, especially with something like Ride. But I think it's very easy to go too far as well and become, thinking about you're never playing in an orchestral audition unless there's a really odd situation, or like maybe if it's a sublist audition or something like that. You're replacing the old tuba player. They don't get to choose their successor, so they're not there. Maybe you get one trombone player, probably not. Maybe you get principal trumpet, maybe. You're probably playing for string players. You're probably playing for the concertmaster. You're probably playing for a principal woodwind player. Maybe you're playing for the conductor. Probably not for the first round, but sometimes you do. Um, but you're not usually playing for people that are on our team, so to speak. And so thinking about those sorts of things with volume, and I think these accents kind of fall into that same category of in the back of the orchestra, you might be right that they should all be accented. In an audition setting, that might be seen as being a little bit overly aggressive and not something that they want to play with every day. Something to kind of think about with all of that. I know you need to kind of get going pretty soon here, Connor. So I think we might have to table our impressions. We were going to play and talk about impressions and modal jazz. How about this? Assuming next week is good, I need to check my calendar, but I think I'm good.
Okay.
Are you good as well?
Yeah, I'm good. As far as I know, I'm good.
So we will start with that because it seems like we are doing a worse job of getting through multiple topics.
Can I give a sneak peek of the visual aids?
Yes.
That we might not even use because I might make something on the computer.
Right.
I drew a picture today.
Ooh, I didn't know that you were going to draw all that.
Oh, yeah.
Well, maybe we could start with just a brief discussion and maybe call this a maybe we can call this a precursor
a teaser.
And if you're thinking about learning this tune for next week's for discussion, that might be kind of cool and helpful, both cool and fun. So could you show maybe the D minor one again?
Sure.
So you drew what I would want you to drew. You drew what I'd want you to draw. But it's interesting. You said D minor, but I thought D minor had different notes than what I'm seeing here.
Right. There's something that's one of these notes is not quite like what we expect.
Right. And maybe two of these notes, no matter what you're looking at,
right.
So when we think about D minor, we think about it as being F major, but starting on D, right? That's a lot of how we think about it. Why don't you have a B flat there, Connor? What are you doing?
So I'll have to talk about it next week.
All right, I guess we'll leave it there. That's a good little teaser. So we'll get into some modal jazz concerns, and if you're scared or you're thinking that this is really really complicated, this tune was chosen for a reason in that it's maybe not always perfectly easy to play over, but it's conceptually pretty simple. There are two chords, and they're the same quality. Well, depending on who you ask,
they're the same flavor of ice cream,
right?
For all intents and purposes of our conversation, if you come next week, you will be able to play a jazz solo over the tune that we talk about by the time you're done talking with us.
Right. So for next week, I think that's a really cool thing that we're gonna do, and we'll use those. We'll keep those visuals. Keep those around. I think those visuals are good. That's kind of a whole trope of sometimes with YouTube videos, you have someone with a marker who's drawing things, and I would do that if I had better handwriting. But your handwriting is impeccable.
I'm used to drawing bubble letters for kindergartners on Zoom, so I know just about how big to write it.
Yeah, no, you understood the assignment. So without further ado, I'll actually use my my new toy, and then I have a foot pedal now. So I will kick it to our intro/outro video without any hands. So we'll see everybody later. Oh no.
Oh wait, keep my hands up.